Hello and welcome to episode 174 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, I will screw up the intro for the first time in years, I think, because usually I'm pretty good on this, even though I don't even have a script for it. But otherwise, we're going to talk about the second week of the Major Four qualifiers, including Mercules making his highly anticipated debut with OpTic Texas, and I guess his full-time CDL debut and his online CDL debut, which I'm sure he was very happy about. We also had a new Cloud9 New York roster pulling off a major upset, a much-needed upset for them as they continue on and try to make champs. And we had a lot more of these sometimes quick, sometimes not so quick matches this weekend. But before we get to any of that, how you doing, Bink?
Doing all right. Like you said, today at least was a very quick and mostly uneventful day. Three 3-0s today. The last five matches of this weekend were 3-0s. So, um, some interesting series, but also some DoorDash specials in 30 minutes or less. But yeah, like you said, Mercules made his debut, and we did get to see some other good stuff that we might as well jump right into.
Yeah, so let's talk about these matches first. The first being Vegas versus Miami. Of course, the Vegas Falcons are all but eliminated from. I believe they actually officially are eliminated from champs contention, but they have been eliminated basically since I don't know February, March. It's been a while now. But Vegas, they lose this one. The Miami Heretics pull off a very close match in total. Very close hard points, round 11 search and destroy. But I think in just general, we can kind of loop in Miami's second match of the weekend because Miami is now the only undefeated team still remaining in these qualifiers. They're 4-0.
Well,
Or yeah, I meant just through four matches, I guess. And they are, heading towards getting the top seed or at least one of the top two seeds at Major Four, and definitely really kind of securing a spot or potentially improving their spot at champs. What did you make of Miami's performance this weekend? Now that they are 4-0 and 12-6 in map count.
yeah, I think the most interesting thing that we gotta continue to evaluate really is just how much of an upgrade this team and just how much they've improved since Super really joined the lineup. The biggest thing that stood out to me this weekend was Breaking Point, I believe. Yeah, Breaking Point tweeted that since Miami officially added Super to the roster, they are 15-3 in Search and Destroy, and they're on a 6 S&D win streak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as we always say on the Ego Chall podcast, that S&D wins championships. That is a really good sign for Miami heading into Major Four and the biggest tournaments of the year. Because if they are playing well in search, that bodes well for their chances of making deep runs in all of these tournaments where the money is just only increasing in terms of how much you can get for really good placings. So that's a really good sign for Miami. And I don't remember which match it would have been after. I don't think I put it. Yeah, I didn't put it in the notes, but they interviewed Metals after one of these victories this weekend, and Puckett like straight up asked him. He was like, "Who do you think Rookie of the Year is right now, Rancor or Super?" And I think Metals, like it's got to be tough to be put on the spot like that and have to pick between two of your teammates. But I think he gave the most logical answer. And basically, what we've been saying, he's like, you got to give it to Rencor right now just because he's played the whole season and Super hasn't. But I do think that becomes a little bit more of an interesting conversation if um, Miami wins Major Four and Super wins MVP. I think you might have to lean towards Super. And I also think now with Mercules in the picture, if OpTic wins Major Four and wins MVP, he would definitely have a strong case for Rookie of the Year, despite only having an even shorter sample size of matches this year in the CDL than Super. So we'll talk plenty about Mercules later in the show, but for right now, focusing on Miami, that's where my head's at with this team. Just really impressed with the S&D play. All of their hard points were a little like were very close this weekend. I mean, both against Vegas 250 to 230 and 250 to 220. And then against Cloud9, they lost Vault 250 to 222, and they won Skyline 250 to 204. So 4 hard points this weekend, and their uh, largest margin of victory was 46. Um, and in the 2 S&Ds they played, they were 6-4 and 6-5. So a lot of close maps for this Miami team. Obviously, they're going their way right now, but that is something we'll have to keep an eye on. That that's something we always talk about with like round 11s. I know we've talked about it with Minnesota and stuff like that, where just one round goes the other way, it looks different. So that is it's not necessarily like Miami is blowing teams out of the water, but 4-0 in the qualifiers is 4-0. They're going to have a really good seed heading into the major, put themselves potentially in an advantageous spot to make a run. I say potentially just because, as we highlighted last week, the 0-2 start for Vancouver and LA Thieves could put this winner's bracket in a little bit of a unique situation. If one of them gets like the 7th or 8th seed and Miami is first or second, that's like, a not necessarily the biggest advantage for a first round matchup, but that we still got some matches to play next week before we get down to the nitty gritty of what the actual bracket will look like.
Like you said, the S&D has been on point. Like the number you said, 15-3. That's their record since he's been in the roster. Super's been in the roster full time. And one of the underrated parts, and it's definitely the smallest part about this, but he's also been able to help Miami stabilize their control game. They were 7-15, I believe, before he came into the roster. They're 6-7 since. So they're not a great control team by any means. But when you're losing, 2/3 of those maps, and now you're losing about half, like that can make a difference over a long period as well. So they've kind of sacrificed a lot with hardpoint. They're kind of a below 500 hardpoint team, just below 500, and they were a little bit above 500 before, but the fact that they're winning nearly every single search and destroy map kind of makes up for that in a big way. And yeah, as far as the rookie of the year conversation goes, I don't know if people actually think like that. I just know that we have kind of thought about that, and the impact that you can make over an entire season. Mercury's case, it would have to be they kind of win out from here and win Major 4. Like anything else, like there's just no way you could even consider him. And even then, it would still be kind of hard to make that argument, especially if Miami continues to do what they've been doing over the last 4 to 5 weeks, or I think it's probably even a little bit longer than that. Since Super came in. So yeah, it's probably going to come down to ring core or just like the impact that Super has had. I think Xnid probably not going to win Rookie of the Year. Vegas, he'll definitely get votes. Just honestly, just there aren't that many options anyway. And he has performed, I guess, individually, not that bad. Like it just kind of plays against him, right? That they are so bad as a team. Like the results have not been there. If they had been able to string a few wins together since this new roster came together, I think maybe you could make that argument that he was just kind of being held back by a lackluster team around him. And you could still make that argument. I would definitely be open to hearing that. But at the same point, when there are rookies that are making a greater impact in terms of winning and having a lot more success, then I think he just is not going to be able to have a case, like a legitimate case to win Rookie of the Year. But we'll see what happens in regards to that. But yeah, Miami now is 4-0 in these qualifiers. They are atop the standings simply because the Toronto Ultra, who are also undefeated in these qualifiers, they are just 3-0. So we'll see what happens with Toronto in this final week. Miami also has one final match in these qualifiers, and they have a really good shot to go 5-0 considering how poorly Carolina has been since this roster change. Anything else on Miami before we move on?
That was the only thing I was gonna. So I think the interview with Meadows was after their second match because I believe they mentioned that now in the CDL standings, Miami is in 5th place. They jumped Carolina. Miami is at 225 CDL points and Carolina is at 220. So I believe they mentioned that before asking Meadows about the Rookie of the Year, and so that means it was probably after their second match, which was against C9 yesterday on Saturday. So if anyone wants to go back and watch the interview, that's probably where it is. But yeah, the fact that you know, not too long ago we were saying although Carolina was struggling against the top teams, it seemed like they were pretty much locked into a champ spot, and now Miami, who is in that little cluster with OpTic and Boston, like not Miami wasn't as low as um OpTic, but they were like in that sort of, I'll just say, bubble for lack of a better term, in terms of a team that uh isn't guaranteed champs but isn't like necessarily on the outside looking in. So they're definitely doing themselves some favors here by capitalizing on these qualifier matches, and now the fact that they even jumped Carolina is that can't go unnoticed.
Yeah, just to illustrate that, in the Major 1 qualifiers, they finished 8th or tied for 8th, 2-5 record. Major 2 qualifiers, they finished in 9th with a 2-5 record. So they were 4-10 in these qualifiers before they brought in Super. In the Major 3 qualifiers, they went 4-1, tied for first place. Now they're 4-0. They're atop the standings right now, but like they're very likely to finish at worst like second or third in these qualifiers. And before this, really the biggest source of points that they had was that Major 1 performance, and that kind of carried them. That got them a really a long way, because they would have been in that bottom 3 most likely if they didn't have that kind of performance. But now it's kind of shifted where they've been able to string together wins online, and that has been really hugely successful for Miami.
And I just noticed this too, that I mean, to further illustrate the importance of those land placements, Miami and OpTic have the same exact record this season, 17-18. And Miami has 60 more CDL points than OpTic. And as we know, OpTic's got top 8 at all 3 majors. Miami has a 3rd and a 4th place finish. So there you go.
Yeah, it's not necessarily how much you win, but where you win is very important. And if like even we've been talking a little bit about, and we'll get to that point about OpTic, they're more than likely going to make champs and get that final 8th spot. But if they have another stinker on LAN and C9 and or Minnesota have a really great run like Miami did at Major 1, that could knock OpTic out of champs contention. So I mean, it really, like, it makes sense that LAN has this greater importance than the online matches, but it's certainly coming down to that as we approach the end of the season. Next up on Friday, we had Boston versus OpTic, the aforementioned OpTic Texas. Mercules making his OpTic debut after signing with the team, formerly the substitute for the Toronto Ultra at Major 3, had that breakout performance. He did not play in the week 1 of these qualifiers, purportedly because of just negotiations over his contract kind of taking too long. There was not a traditional 1-week break between the major and the qualifiers. So he comes in week 2, and just like I think I alluded to on the last podcast, these two teams, Boston and OpTic, played in the very first match of this season. Of course, Boston had one of the worst seasons in CDL history last year. OpTic won the World Championship last year. So coming into this, or coming into that match at the beginning of the year, you thought, okay, OpTic is going to crush Boston. Of course, Boston turned around and won that match, and has had a great season since then, at least according to their standards. And then coming into this, Mercules, a lot of well-founded hype, a lot of excitement around his debut. Boston has been, kind of floating in the middle. They're in 7th place. They've been in, that 6, 7, 8 spot for most of the season now. Certainly not one of the top teams, but they have the ability to beat some of the top teams, which could be almost as important And they come into this match, and with all the hype around Mercules and OpTic, they end up beating OpTic Texas and Mercules in his first match with his new team. Nearly reverse swept, though. OpTic did make a furious comeback, and then Boston closed it out on Hasi Enda Search and Destroy. What did you make of Mercules' debut, and what did you make of my Boston Breach boys?
Yeah, I mean, OpTic was it took a little bit to get going in this series in particular, but really Mercules absolutely just dominated maps 3 and 4 in particular. Went 31 and 20 map 3, followed that up with 32 and 14, which is over a 2 KD in the rewind hardpoint, which OpTic won 250 to 120. So, not quite a 100-point club, but pretty close. Just came down to the searches, and that's I'm not going to say that's to be expected because there was some we've talked about Mercules being an S&D kid, and um, he looked good in S&D with Toronto at uh, Major 3, but we talk about on the podcast, numerous times with other roster changes, S&D is just the way roster changes work. Teams focus on the respawns and scrims and practice and stuff right after making a respawn or a roster change. So it's not, very likely that OpTic had a lot of S&D reps with Mercules heading into this series. So not to make excuses, but that's probably the most likely explanation for how Boston was able to win 2 S&Ds here. But it was a pretty good series, all things considered. Boston in particular looked really strong on the P4 or the Rock Hill on Hacienda Hardpoint. They almost had 2 full 60s if I remember correctly, and if it wasn't, if they got 100 points on that hardpoint, I would be surprised. Like it felt like they did a really good job on that. And when it's a 30-point game and you're dominating one hill in particular, that has to be factored into being a large contributor to the way the score worked out. So I definitely I thought there were some shining moments there from Mercules and the new OpTic team in general in the maps 3 and 4. The search and destroys were close, especially for a newer team, but just didn't get it done in the end for the green wall. I did think it was funny too. I put down in here that after one match in Scum's chat, the green wall, obviously it's just one chat, but somebody paid like $5 or whatever. Was it a $5 super chat? It was a super chat, but I screenshotted it. It was a $2 super chat. Somebody just willingly gave Scump $2 and said Merc deserves a better team after one match. So I thought, that was funny. The green wall never fails. When already they're turning on the old boys and being like, damn, this new kid needs some help after one series against the Boston Breach. But yeah, on a more serious note, I did think Mercules played pretty well in his first series here with OpTic. We'll talk more about them in their second match. That was a little different there than this, but this is a big win for Boston in terms of like the way the standings are, just because they are that team that's right above OpTic in the season standings. And if OpTic had won this match, they would have only been 5 points apart because Boston's at 190. So yeah, they would have been 180. OpTic would have been 175. So gives Boston a little bit of a cushion here, at least in terms of their separation with OpTic and the 8th and final spot for champs. So big win for Boston, all things considered.
Yeah, let's talk actually about the OpTic second match as well, because I want to talk about Carolina after that. OpTic and Carolina, they played. They were the final match on Saturday. OpTic ends up 3-0ing Carolina in this series. Not like the closest series in the world, not like a blowout either, but still a 3-0 regardless. Pretty rare for this, obviously I can't say this version of OpTic Texas because it's a new version, but OpTic in general has had a tough season. They have not been able to consistently pick up wins, especially against the top 5 or 6 teams in the league. They've essentially been farming a lot of the wins like in the bottom half of the league. That being said, Carolina has not performed up to standard, and OpTic, Mercules included, or especially, he showed up. He had a incredible series, and I saw the graphic that they put up at the end of the stream, and they put it up on Twitter as well. Granted, he's only played 2 matches, so very small sample size because some of the other players have played 3 or 4. But Mercules is now the KD leader among all players in the Major 4 qualifiers. After 2 matches, he has a 1.4 KD. The next closest is Celium at 1.28. All 4 members of OpTic are within the top 8. Hook at 1.24, Shotzi 1.13, and Dashi at 1.09. What did you make of the difference between Series 1 for OpTic and Mercules and Series 2 where they beat Carolina?
I mean, kind of like you said, like it wasn't necessarily a blowout, but it wasn't really the closest maps. And I think this goes back to our conversation over the last couple months with Carolina, in terms of Carolina being able to beat the bottom teams and not beating the top teams. And I think that, begs the question here, is OpTic like a quote unquote top team now with Mercules? And, it is a small sample size, but I think at least like, based on what we've seen so far, they definitely feel improved, and that like the excitement and the potential is there for this OpTic team to be the best roster that they've had so far this year. And if that follows, just what we've seen from Carolina this year in terms of struggling against the quote unquote top teams, then that could be one way to look at the series. But I mean, Mercules going 34-11 in the control. This, like, he had over a 2 KD in that one map I mentioned in the Boston series, and then basically a 3 KD in another map. Like that's going to give you a pretty good KD, especially in just a 2 series sample size, like you were saying. But honestly, for me, the biggest thing that I noticed in this series for OpTic and Carolina was Hook's wallbang spot on dealership S&D and map 2. Was watching the Scump watch party during that, and Embos was kind of like, oh, why are we showing that off now? And Scump was kind of like, well, I mean, it's a must-win match. All our matches are must-win at this point. And Embos was kind of like, yeah, you could save that for champs, yada yada. That's something we've talked about over the years, like people, saving spots and whatnot for the biggest tournament. But this spot that Hook like shot through the wall, and they were saying like in the newer games, a red triangle or diamond will appear over people's heads when you're looking through walls and certain things. It'll appear when you're like looking at them normally, but like that was their assumption here, was that somehow Hook was able to see that little marker through the wall, and that's how he was able to wallbang that the guy planting the bomb. And I think that just the fact that this has been shown off now, that might like completely deter teams from playing dealership, at least at the tournament. We might see it still in these qualifiers as teams like want to get more reps on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if either we start to see more teams just decide not to play dealership now, or if we do see them playing it, they go towards that other bomb site. The problem with the other bomb site is that's the one that is surrounded by a ton of cars, and if you just save your nades and throw nades at that site, you might get a lucky car bomb or something like that can sway the favor of a round just by a car blowing up, or an OpTic van for lack of a better term there. Yeah. So yeah, that was an interesting. I'm not gonna. I mean, like I was saying, OpTic's got to win these matches. So Hook probably wasn't even thinking about like, saving it or not saving that spot. But it is. Sure, I think that just that one round could have some serious implications for how much we see dealership the rest of the year. Or it could have just been a thing that, a lot of these teams knew about and we just hadn't seen it yet. And that's why like the community and the commentators are overthinking it. It's very possible that a lot of these guys did know about it, and we're just seeing it for the first time. But that was definitely something that caught my attention during the game.
Let's shift to Carolina because they're a team we have discussed a lot this season. I would say positively for most of the year, and rather or relatively negatively over the past month and a half. They are now 1-5 since picking up Rex, dropping Vivid and picking up Rex in his place. The Obviously, we talked about it at the time when they made this roster change. We asked the question, or we had this discussion of like, is it worth it to make the leap for it? The trying to risk it by messing up team chemistry potentially to try to beat these top teams. I forget what the record was, but it basically was Carolina slaughtered pretty much every team below sixth
Yeah.
place in the league, and everything above it they lost those matches, and that was pretty much why they were in the place that they were going into that roster change. They end up dropping Vivid, who statistically had been the worst player on the team. He had been kind of much maligned for most of the season, especially when they would lose, but they were still winning a lot of these matches. But since they dropped him, they picked up Rex, who has been in challengers for a long time and hadn't been given a CDL shot in a while. Since then, they're 1-5. I should mention, though, in something that you kind of alluded to, maybe OpTic is a top team because the 5 losses are twice to LAT, which I think could be kind of disregarded because Carolina could not beat LAT before they had Rex either. But then they lost to Minnesota, which that's kind of like the concerning loss out of these 5, or the most concerning loss. Then they lost to the Toronto Ultra. Their one win was last week against the Boston Breach. They 3-0'd Boston. And then this weekend, yesterday, they lost to OpTic 3-0. So I posed the question to you because you said, I believe, like Major 3 was a wash. Like nothing that happened there, at least negatively, could impact your kind of thinking on that roster change because they made that roster change like a week and a half maybe before they ended up going to the Major. So they don't do well at Major 3. Even the first few matches of Major 4, I think, with especially them playing LAT, that's kind of a wash anyway. Now that we are 2 weeks into the qualifiers, we're only 2 weeks away from Major 4. How are you feeling? Is there a level of concern for you around this roster change for Carolina?
I mean there has to be, just because like you said, the way that I was thinking about it at the time, the move happened heading into the last week of Major 3 qualifiers. Carolina had already played 4 matches up to that point. Their only match remaining in those qualifiers was against LA Thieves. They couldn't beat them with Vivid. They still didn't beat them with Rex. Then they play them again at Major 1. Carolina plays LA Thieves again, round 1 at Major 3, and they lose again. So I just, it was really hard to get a grasp for what kind of impact Rex was having with this team, considering just the very brief time he had to play with these guys, and the level of the opponent they were going up against. And like you said, they weren't beating LA Thieves even before the Rex move. So, um, but yeah, now it's just, the bigger thing with Carolina in my eyes is the hard point seemingly was a little like here and there, like a bit of a seesaw at different points this year. It was really the search that's been their go-to mode most of the year. And there was actually a funny conversation on Dashy's stream last night where they were talking about who's the S&D goat and all this stuff, and they were talking about Illy, and then Slasher joins the conversation and joins the actual call, and he's like, every team that I'm on is elevated to be a really good S&D team, and I think that's a cool conversation we can have another time. But that was really like the thing with this Carolina team, and I did say when they had Vivid on the roster, like I think very highly of Vivid as an S&D player, and uh, it was going to be interesting how the replacing Vivid would impact the S&D. I know I said that at the time of the move. So yeah, I mean, if they were already a team that was struggling at points in hard point, and then they bring in Rex, and the hard point doesn't like really improve. And the search seemingly, I don't want to say it took a hit, but it's just not the same since Rex has been in the picture. That's also again skewed by some losses um, to LA Thieves. Um, End of the day, it is still a very, like you said, 1 in 5 with Rex. Still a small sample size, but I do think there has to be some concern there for Carolina fans, just because that my whole thinking with this roster change, with the time of where it was made in the season, was um, again, putting myself in Carolina's camp, I was saying, like, does making this roster move with Rex replacing Vivid give us a better chance to place better at these bigger tournaments at the end of the year? If you answer yes to that question as Carolina, you make the move. If you answer no, you don't make the move. And we don't know if that's what they were thinking, but I feel like there had to have been some level of thought put into that. And right now, if you ask me that question, like, does the Rex move give them a better chance? Like, the answer is no right now, just because we haven't, outside of the series against Boston, we just haven't seen, a level of improvement from this Carolina team. And you can't put that all on Rex, because Rex did play well in the series win over Boston, had a 1.35 KD to lead the lobby for that series. And we've seen him, I think it was in the Toronto series. He had a couple of really good maps against Toronto too, where I will say they did win a search and destroy uh, against Toronto 6-5, where Kleenex dropped the record 17 kills. So that's a little bit of a weird one, but yeah, I think we're gonna have to see how Carolina really um, tries to work through this, like, little rut they're in as a squad. The clock is ticking, though. They don't have that many opportunities, but at the same time, if they are in this position where they should be at champs, maybe they just hit that reset button with the break after Major Four and heading into champs, and they really just, start grinding out and continue to build chemistry with a guy who, at the end of the day, they've played less than a month with Rex. Um, so maybe they need more time. I don't really have a solid answer. I just know right now the results haven't been there for Carolina, and like we've talked a lot about Carolina. Like you said, they were a team heading into this year probably not a lot of people had on their radar. They got off to a really strong start, and we highlighted that early on, that, like, this was important. The strong start was important, because if they didn't have that strong start and now they're in this position where they're losing a lot towards the end of the year, they could have been on the outside looking in terms of the champs race. So um tough situation and tough spot to be in for Carolina, but there is still some time for them to try and work through whatever's going on there. I still think, obviously you got a guy like Slasher on the team. They have the recipe and they know what they got to do in search. If they continue to work through the hard point, and, Gwen plays to that superstar level we know he's capable of, maybe even TJ shows up to that star level we saw really early on in the season, especially at Major One. The potential's there for Carolina to turn things around.
The numbers before they made this roster change, so this is for the entire season. They were 27 and 24 in hard point, so that kind of illustrates your point about it was up and down, a little over 500, which makes sense because they were pretty good in hard point to begin the season. Then it started to slow down. S&D was by far their strongest game mode, 25 and 14 on the year, and then they were 15 and 16 in control, so just below 500 in the third game mode. Since the roster change, they are 1 and 7 in hard point. So obviously, it's dropped off a cliff in terms of win-loss percentage. They are 2 and 4 in S&D, which is even more concerning because they had, like a 55-60% win percentage in search, and now they're like 33%. And then they have the same exact record, 2 and 4 in control. So that's the least important out of all of this. But I wanted to because I think it's kind of unfair to say, okay, you played LAT twice, you played Toronto, you played this new OpTic roster, and like, so that you could say, well, just looking at how good of those teams, or how many good teams you played, I think it's unfair to compared across the whole season because they played Vegas a bunch of times, and the early part of the season they played some of those really bad teams like LAG, so they've been able to get wins. So I just looked at the matches that Carolina had played against those, I believe, 5 teams, which was LAT, Minnesota, Toronto, Boston, OpTic. I looked at everything before they made this roster change against those teams specifically, and in total, their hard point was not very good as expected because they played LAT, and LAT is kind of like 3-0'd them every single time except one time, and those hard points haven't even been close in a lot of instances. So they were 5-12 against those teams in hard point. That being said, that's way better than what they're on pace for right now. They're 1-7 to reach 5 map wins in hard point. At this point, they'd be like 5-35. So I don't think it's working out in their favor on that front. S&D again is the most concerning. Like I said, so far with this new roster, they're 2-4 in search. They were 9-4 against these teams in search and destroy with Vivid, and then control they were 4-7. So I think it's kind of a wash at that point. So I just kind of wanted to back up those numbers because I could understand if those numbers stayed the same, then you're like, okay, like it's whatever. Maybe it'll get better as time goes on. I think it's really concerning the fact that against these same teams, they've had worse results. And again, a little bit to be expected considering you're essentially throwing away months of team chemistry and team building with Vivid, and then you're bringing in Rex for the final 5-6 weeks of the regular season, and then maybe 9 to 10 weeks before champs. So like there could be a big jump in performance as we see this next, especially between Major 4 and champs. But from what we have seen of Carolina since making this roster change and bringing in Rex, I'm officially concerned. And I think that, Carolina fans probably should be a little concerned as well about how this end of season is going. And like you mentioned especially with the standings, they're very, very lucky that they did so well earlier in this season, because right now they are 30 points ahead of Boston, who they beat in these qualifiers. So that's good, because if they hadn't, this would be a 10-point difference between Carolina and Boston for 6th place. They have a chance, I should say, because they play 2 matches this week, once against Miami. Carolina does have the ability to finish these qualifiers in 5th place in the overall standings if they do beat Miami. So that there's something to kind of work for Carolina in the qualifiers. We'll see what happens at the major, but if they begin the major again in the losers bracket, I just don't see it going their way. They're probably going to play a tough team in losers round 1. And if you come away with 0 points at the major, we've seen how detrimental that can be to your champs seeding and the CDL points overall this season.
Given their track record against top teams, like last major, they started in winners bracket, but they might as well have started in loser bracket because they played LATs round 1. So like if they finish these qualifiers, even if they do get into the winners bracket as one of the lower seeds and they play a top team that they've struggled against, then it could be a difficult major for them.
Especially because some of the top teams have underperformed in these qualifiers. So teams like LAT and Vancouver, who have more often than not had Carolina's number, they are at the same record and they're just above them in the standings. So it's very realistic for one of those teams to drop down the loser bracket and play Carolina round 1, which is worst case scenario for the Royal Ravens. And then the last match on Friday was inarguably the biggest upset of the weekend. Atlanta and C9. We talked about it last week, how Atlanta kind of looked like they were back. They looked like, all right, like screw this, we're not going down without a fight. Actually, they didn't have their best performance at Major 3. I think there was a little more doubt cast upon them after obviously winning the first 2 majors, looking like a really strong team to finish the qualifiers in every single instance. This time though, they start off the qualifiers really well, and then they lose to C9, who is in 10th place in the league. They have really struggled in a lot of these online matches in particular. But C9 New York, with this new roster, they beat Atlanta 3-1. They lose the S&D red card search, but they come away with a 3-1 victory. What do you think is this? I don't want to ask, is this concerning? Because I think the answer, especially with FaZe, is generally no, it's not concerning. Um, does it say anything about FaZe, though, that they seem to have kind of these slip ups in the qualifiers? Like, usually it's happened at the beginning of the qualifiers where they start 0-1 or 0-2. This time they start really well, and then they have the slip up against C9, undoubtedly an inferior opponent. Does that, you know, does that mean anything for you with FaZe?
No, not really. I mean, the map one in this series for Cloud9, everyone on Cloud9 did go negative, and Cell has a 42 and 26 performance, and Cloud9's able to win that one 250 to 223. I think overall it highlights the Atlanta hardpoint issues that we discussed previously. They aren't totally rectified at this point. If Atlanta is losing 2 hardpoints to a team like Cloud9, they win the search 6-1, which that was, um, that's kind of, I've said that even during like this past Major 3 qualifiers and Major 3 itself. There were a couple series I remember off the top of my head where Atlanta loses game 1 and then they win 6-0, 6-1 in the search and 3-0 in the controls, and it's like, oh well, they're up 2-1 even though they didn't look great in the hard point. Um, so it's not totally out there. And I remember this control. I didn't write it down in the notes, but I'm pretty sure I'm gonna say the sides. I just don't remember. It was either like, you know, the defense won the first 4 sides of control to go 2-2-2-2, and then offense won the last round, or it might have been, reverse there where offense won the 4 rounds and defense won in the end, but I'm pretty sure Cloud9 was on offense. But either way, that was a pretty close uh control too that came down to the wire. So it's not like, Atlanta got blown out. And, what I'm about to say definitely isn't, intended to be an excuse, but it is, you know, potentially something that could matter, or it just could be pure BS that I'm spewing here. Um, but when you make a change like Cloud9 did, where you're bringing in 2 challengers players, it's possible that um, maybe there was just some timings or some things they were doing on the map that Atlanta is just not used to. Um, Especially because we highlighted it last episode where there's been this discrepancy in the patch being used by even the challengers and the pros themselves, to the point where like challengers and pros haven't been able to scrim or practice against each other for several months at this point now. So it, maybe there's something there. I feel like for a team like Atlanta, that shouldn't be a thing, and that shouldn't really matter. And it's not like Capital and Sport. These guys have never played against them. It's not like they're total, new guys or anything like that. Like they've played against them in other games and on other teams before too. Um, but that's just something that came to mind for me. I don't think I don't think it really means anything, but it's something that came across my mind, so it's possible. But end of the day, I just think this is one that maybe Cloud9 caught Atlanta slipping a little bit. I believe this was on Draw's birthday.
Yeah, it was.
Maybe Atlanta was coming in riding the high of those wins over Vancouver and LA Thieves, and we're just like, they were kind of just not taking this. I don't want to say they weren't taking this match seriously, but maybe they were kind of just like,
Not prepared, really.
not, yeah, maybe they just, took Cloud9 a little lightly, and Cloud9 showed they shouldn't be taken lightly. I do think this new roster has definitely looked way more competitive for Cloud9 than the previous roster. Even in their losses, I feel like they've looked better in certain maps. And I think that's Call of Duty in a nutshell nowadays, especially like the just in this league, especially um, even you look at, like you mentioned just like a half hour ago, where we're talking about Boston versus OpTic to kick off this season. Like, you know, the you really can't take anyone lightly, because they will punish you if you do, to some extent. So, um, it's a big win for Cloud9 in terms of them potentially making a run for champs. It came on the same day as OpTic losing to Boston, so like that was a big exchange of points there for Cloud9. That, like you mentioned earlier, they're now 40 points back of OpTic
Mm-hmm.
for CDL points, and they're tied with Minnesota. So that does put a little. It's not only a one match difference. They still have to go on a really strong run to end these qualifiers, and they have to do very well at Major Four, and OpTic have to really struggle at Major Four. But like the door is, even if it's only open a crack, it's still it's slightly ajar, and there's an opportunity there. It's just going to be interesting to see if they're able to make some magic happen. We've seen it before with the subliners in Vanguard, I believe.
Yeah, to finish on Atlanta just for this week, they played LAG in their second match.
Yeah.
Understandably, they swept them, but that S&D, the rewind search was ridiculous. Like
Yeah.
LAG down 3-1, then they win 4 straight rounds. They're on map point, and then they lose 6-5. They lose the final 3 rounds. They get round 11 by Atlanta. I don't think there needs to be much said, but what did you take away from this series? Obviously, because it's an expected result, just not the way that we got to that result.
This entire season for Gentlemates has really not gone the way they envisioned, obviously. And even with this newest iteration, since they brought in Fellow and Johnny to play alongside Kismet and Lunars, like things just haven't gone their way. It's really been a struggle for them overall. There have been instances where they've shown some glimpses here and there of promise, and I guess you can look at that Rewind S&D as an example of that. Like they're able to go on a 4-round streak in an S&D against arguably the best S&D team in the game, if not number one of the top S&D teams. They aren't able to close it out, and it is what it is. I think that would have been very interesting if LAG was able to upset Atlanta after Atlanta lost to Cloud9. Then we're probably having a whole different conversation here. But end of the day, Atlanta takes care of business earlier today, on a day where there were a lot of 3-0s of teams, taking care of business against teams they probably should be in most people's eyes. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles, I guess, for Gentlemates.
To finish up on C9 real quick, because we already talked about their second match, which is against Miami. They lose 3-1 in that series because we talked about Miami just going 4-0 in general. But now C9, they're 2-2 in these qualifiers, like you mentioned with the standings. That win against FaZe could be crucial. Like if they end up making champs, I think we'll look back on that win and say like that was something that that helped them more than anything, because right now they are 40 points behind OpTic. They're tied for 9th place with Minnesota. And if you just looked at the schedule going into these qualifiers, you thought, okay, like C9 has very little chance here to like make it into the winners bracket, which is still to be determined, I guess. But just looking at their schedule, they played Vegas. You're expecting them to win, but then they played Toronto, Atlanta, Miami, and then they play LAT in the final qualifier this coming week. So you would just expect them to probably go 1-4. They at minimum are going 2-3. They, I guess, technically have the opportunity to go 3-2 if they pull off an upset against LAT. So I just figured we'd finish up C9 on that point because they, if they do make champs, we'll look back on that FaZe win as just this unexpected result that kind of gave them that extra 10 points and ultimately might get them in the winners bracket, which we'll see what happens with the standings, though. That's the biggest point right now, is there's so many matches, like the middle or the bottom part of these qualifiers. Most of those teams have only played 3 matches so far, and it's still to be determined like who's going to get those final 3 or 4 spots in the qualifiers. So I think that will be a big point of contention in this final week of the Major 4 qualifiers. On Saturday, we had Minnesota versus LAG. Again, LAG is awful, but still Minnesota had a hard time with them. I believe this loss officially knocked LAG out of champs contention, if I'm not mistaken, or was that the first match?
It was OpTic's win over Carolina that
Okay.
like sealed the deal, I believe.
Yeah, so this loss compounded with OpTic, who won later in the day against Carolina, that sealed the deal. LAG officially not going to champs, which is unsurprising considering, like I mentioned, I think before we went on the air, we'll have the conversation when it officially happens because we already had a version of the conversation,
Yeah.
but we'll officially have another conversation because LAG is on the verge of having the second worst season in CDL history and kind of going under the radar while doing so. Minnesota, though, this was nearly a disaster, to be honest, because they get to game 5, they lose game 4 and tie the series. LAG, they win round 11 in the first S&D, and Minnesota's up 5-2 and just start losing round after round after round. And I mean, anytime that a team loses like 2 or 3 consecutive rounds when they're at five round wins, you're like, oh, this is not good. This is about to be real bad. And fortunately for Minnesota, they were able to avert disaster. If they had lost this, it's kind of one of those things where I believe Minnesota lost to Vegas as well in these qualifiers, and that's just those. If they had lost this one as well, I mean, that would just be like, what are you guys doing? Like, you don't deserve to go to champs if you lose these matches, especially with how close you are to actually catching OpTic in the long run. But they're able to win. They get a much needed win. What did you make of Minnesota's weekend here? They lost to Toronto as we kind of expected in the last match of today.
Yeah, I do think, it kind of ties in with LAG a little bit here that they did have um, the ability to win 2 maps here against Minnesota. It was a 6-5 in the red card search map 2, and we've talked a lot about Minnesota in round 11s. Usually it's game 5 round 11s, but this is another round 11 loss for Minnesota here. It's really just that the Minnesota team, and I feel like it was a lot of Nero this weekend being the guy who had these pop off moments, especially in the hard points. He had 33 kills map 1 against LAG, 36 map 4 in a loss where Johnny and Kismet both had 37, and then in the Toronto series he went 40 and 34 today in the hard point. And that's just been the thing for Minnesota is they have, like, even in the map 1 against LAG, Estriel goes 27 and 14, which is almost a 2 KD there. So that's an instance where like Nero and Estriel were playing well at the same time. But it's like the thing with Minnesota this year, especially the core 3 of Nero, Estriel, and Geo, is they all have that pop off potential and they just haven't been able to consistently put it together at the same time. It's usually one of them going off and not, all of them working together to maybe like lower it to the point where like maybe Nero drops 30 kills instead of 40 and those other 10 kills are spread out a little more evenly across those other guys, which we talk about it enough on the pod, like there's only X amount of kills on the map anyway, yada yada. But just the consistency, the potential has been there for this Minnesota team. It's just the consistent slaying at the same time as one another has seemingly been the missing ingredient for this Minnesota team in the hard points, and then just the clutch factor in the search. They've definitely had a lot of round 11s this year, and earlier in the season they were pulling off reverse sweeps, getting to the game 5s and just not closing it out. So they've played a lot of round 11s. I don't know what the exact record is, but it's just especially lately, it feels like they haven't been going their way. And I think that was kind of the funny part about this series, especially at the end there, where Minnesota's up 5-2 in the game 5, and you're sitting back thinking, oh, they're finally going to get a game 5 win, and it's going to be, not necessarily easy, but they're going to close out. It's not going to have to be another game 5 round 11. And then I believe it would have been round 9 because it was 5-3. I don't remember who threw the nade for LAG, but someone on LAG threw the nade and it killed Nero as Nero was cooking a nade, and then Nero's nade killed Estriel, I believe, or it was something like LAG got a nade kill, and that nade kill caused a team nade kill for Minnesota, and it was kind of like, oh boy, this is where it's going on. This is just the bad luck that's happening for this team. And you probably, I think, maybe Nameless did on like the post-match interview, asked a question or something like that. It was just like, are you thinking in the back of your head, here we go again? And Scump even said it on the Scump watch party, I believe. He's just like, you can't be thinking like that, because if you're thinking like that, it's chalked. So they were able to round it out and avoid another Game 5, Round 11. So that's good for them. But definitely, in terms of the champs picture and everything like that, big win for Minnesota. Minnesota fans probably would have liked to see a more convincing victory, though, and just avoid a Game 5 altogether. But end of the day, right now, when you're chasing CDL points, a win is a win. So they'll take it where they can. They still got more work to do, though.
Yeah, shout out Mesty, Adele, Gibby, and Nash in the YouTube chat. I was actually looking up what their Game 5 record is, Minnesota. So I guess they're 6-9 on the season, but they are like, if you think about it, like they've only won 12 matches this season, so half of their wins are Game 5 wins. And they started 4-0 in Game 5s this season, so they've lost 9 of their last 11 Game 5s or series that went Game 5s, which is pretty crazy. It just kind of points to how much different the season could have been for Minnesota. And it's not over by any means. They still have an opportunity to make champs. It's just kind of a long shot. But if they had been able to go 500 or just win one or two more of these Game 5s, man, it could have been really different for the Rocker heading into the final part of this season. LAT versus Vegas up next. We talked about Vegas, their first match. They get stomped here, as expected. Like LAT is the best or second best team in the league, regardless of what you think about Atlanta or Vancouver. Like, they are one of the top two teams. Vegas is the worst. On some days, I think LAG might be worse, but they're at best the second worst team. So this is just kind of the expected result when one of the best play one of the worst, right?
It had to feel good for LAT, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, just because of that week 1 they had in these qualifiers going 0-2 with losses to Atlanta and Miami, I believe. So if LA Thieves lost this match to Vegas, there would have been major red flags, especially coming off of their success at Major 3. But this is a game, like a get right game, or however you want to phrase it. Like we talked about it, earlier in the season, where we talk about like college football teams scheduling those matches early in the season before they have to get into conference play or whatever. Obviously that's not the case here, because the schedule was planned months ago, but considering the teams LAT played last week, they see this on the schedule, they gotta be like, okay, we gotta win this one, get back on the right track, and they did that. They took care of business, 3-0 quick series. Yeah, not much we got to talk about here, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a tune-up game. This is Alabama playing the Citadel. This is just one-way traffic, basically. Carolina and OpTic we talked about, and then the Sunday matches were, really the final 5 matches, I believe. So the final 2 matches on Saturday, and then every single match on Sunday were 3-0. DoorDash, all of that stuff is pretty incredible. Like you said, this ended today at 6:00 p.m. Eastern. So the matches were only on for 3 hours or so. And I don't know, maybe they were just the NBA playoffs are on, let's get everybody out of here. But yeah, that did not, none of these matches were particularly competitive. There were certain maps, right, that there were, it was kind of back and forth. In the first series of the day, the hard point was decently close. Purge, my boy, dropping 40 kills, but that was the closest map of them all, was a 250-189 hard point win, so a 61-point victory. In that second match of the day, Atlanta versus LAG, which we already talked about, that went to round 11. And then in the last match, Minnesota versus Toronto, it was the hard point, 250-228, Toronto wins. Of these matches, did anything jump out to you? Because I guess these are all the expected results. We had Vancouver and Boston, even with Vancouver struggling to begin the Major 4 qualifiers, they're still a vastly superior team to the Breach. LAG versus Atlanta, enough said about that. And then Toronto versus Minnesota, they're kind of in the same boat as like Vancouver and Boston. Toronto, even at their worst, has been better than Minnesota this entire season, and it just kind of worked out that way. So what did you think of this very brief, very one-sided Sunday?
Well, I just went and looked at the CDL YouTube, and the VOD for today's stream is 5 hours and 23 minutes, which even if they started it at 2 Eastern with the matches starting at 3, 5 hours and 20 minutes, that would have, if they started at 2, that would have been 7:30, and we started this podcast at 8. So like, I know the matches weren't going on still at 7:30 because I had texted you, or you had texted me before that. So I don't know how that
maybe an hour before, an
out.
hour after, maybe.
Maybe, but even then it seems a little off. But then I look at the VOD for day 2, which was yesterday, Saturday, and that's 8 hours and 1 minute. So maybe it is just, running before and after, because even yesterday wasn't an 8-hour day. It was 4 matches, but regardless, very quick day today, all things considered. I do think the Vancouver match was the one that stood out the most to me, in the sense of being comparable to the LA Thieves versus Vegas match we just talked about. Vancouver gets off to that 0-2 start in these qualifiers after making it to the finals of Major 3 and Major 2 for that matter. So getting a win on the board here was important for their, aspirations. I don't think aspirations is the right word, just because they are a top team, but like if they wanted to make winners bracket of Major 4 and they lost this match to Boston, they would have been 0-3. It's tough for 2-3 teams to all make winners bracket, just given the tiebreakers and whatnot. So this was a big win for them in terms of turning things around from just the brief little 0-2 week last week, and important in terms of trying to make winners bracket. But like we said earlier, with both them and LA Thieves going 0-2 in the previous week, now being in 1-2, I am excited for after next week, which will be the final week of online Call of Duty for this year. I'm excited to see how the top 8 seeds break down, especially where Vancouver and LA Thieves are if they do make winners bracket, because that could give us some spicy round 1 matchups in winners bracket.
Yeah, let's talk about the Major 4 qualifier standings before we go into this final online pick'em of the season. So at the top, like we mentioned earlier, Miami has 40 CDL points. They're 4-0. Toronto and Atlanta are technically tied for second, but Toronto has only played 3 matches. They're 3-0. Atlanta is 3-1. OpTic Texas is in 4th place at 2-1. C9 New York has the same number of points, but they're 2-2 in 5th place. And then we have, I think it's 5 teams at 1-2 currently. So LAT, Vancouver, Carolina, Minnesota, and Boston are all 1-2. They have 10 CDL points. That is 6th through 10. And then Vegas has also 10 points, but they're 1-3 instead of 1-2. They are in 11th. And then coming in at 12th place, 0 CDL points, LAG. They are 0-3. Technically, they have the opportunity to at least get one match win. Technically, 2. I do not see that happening. But yeah, that is the standings as we go into the final week of the qualifiers. Starting on Friday, May 16th, OpTic versus the aforementioned LAG. I'm going with OpTic. I assume you are as well.
Are we doing this now, or are we saving this for Wednesday?
Oh, yeah. I forgot we didn't. I was like, oh, yeah.
We can do it now.
No, we're good. We need something to talk about on Wednesday unless something big drops. Yeah, I was zoning out. I literally thought we were about to go into the pick'em. But yeah, so pick'em. This past week we both did pretty well. We both got that FaZe C9 match wrong. I picked Carolina versus OpTic, and you did not. And I think the other one was you picked OpTic, and I went with Boston. Yeah. So OpTic and FaZe really screwing both of us, but otherwise we went 8-2 on the week, and I had a 3-match lead going into the week. So I'm 138-72. You're 135-75 going into the final week of online Call of Duty, which is very exciting. Not nearly as exciting for us as it is for the players, I'm sure. They still have a bunch of practice they have to do online, but I'm sure not having to play on these weird servers enforced by the CDL is something they're very much looking forward to. Anything else we want to talk about? The you mentioned the top S&D player thing with Slasher, how he said he's had great teams over Illy. Do you want to talk about the Octane tweet?
Let's save it for Wednesday, just in case we don't have anything else to talk about then.
All right.
I think that's a funny one. But I did want to highlight, I know I mentioned it briefly at the start of the show, but Breaking Point said that 37% of all matches this year in the CDL have been 3-0s, 77 out of 210 matches. I just think that's an interesting number. I would like to see how it compares to other seasons and stuff, but I do think, just thinking about it out loud, it seems like it could be, there could be multiple ways to look at it, because I feel like in previous years there would have been more 3-0s because the top teams were so much better than more teams. But this year, I feel like if that 37% is a higher number, it doesn't really fit the whole like feeling of there being less of a gap between like the middle of the pack and that stuff. So I do think that's interesting. But without that additional, information in terms of how many 3-0s there have been over all the years of the CDL, I don't think there's much we can really take away from that. I do just, it definitely is a number that makes you think, and maybe we'll get some more information as the year winds down here in terms of how it compares to previous seasons.
Yeah, I would like you, I want to have that number about like what has been like the last few seasons, I guess, because this year it's like we have two horrendous teams at the very bottom, which I wonder how much that affects it as well. That like LAG, granted, LAG was like competitive. They would get to game fives like earlier in the season, especially, but both of those teams, they have a combined 6 wins on the year. So I wonder how badly that kind of plays into it. But like you, I think it's weird because I think about this, like, it seems like there is quite a bit of parity like within most of the league. Like the top 10 teams, let's say, are not crunched together, but there has been a lot of fluidity, especially like 5 to 10 this season, where I feel like sometimes there is like a pretty clear like 5 to 8, and I just don't see that being the case so far this season. That being said, like, we have had 2 teams that are like much better than the rest for the entire season, that being Atlanta and LAT. And then those like 3 through 6 have kind of like shuffled in and out. Vancouver was not a part of that group for a chunk of this season. Miami, which is now a part of that group, was also not, in that or among those teams for a chunk of this season. So yeah, I'd be interested in hearing what it looked like before, especially when we had like 4 legitimate like champs contenders, where I don't feel like that is the case this season. Like maybe you can make the argument for Toronto. I don't see that. I would say that there's probably 3 right now. But we used to get Atlanta, LAT, OpTic, New York, and Toronto. Really could have had 5 champs contenders, sometimes not at the same time. But yeah, I would be interested in hearing what the stats look like over past seasons as well. But yeah, that about does it for this week's show. We would not do the pick'em like I was just about to do a few minutes ago. We will do that on Wednesday, May 14th, I believe. Make sure to subscribe, like, and follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can go back and watch the videos. You can also do that on Spotify as well. You can watch the videos of the podcast dating back to 2021, I believe, was our first season. Maybe 22, 21, it seems right. Because we didn't do the first season of the CDL, which was 2020, but we did it starting with the second season. So you can go back to 2021, which feels like 104 years ago instead of just 4. And you can watch them all on YouTube or Spotify. You can also follow us on Twitter at JBank with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast tour is at Ego Chall Podcast. You can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/JBank with 2Ks. And like I said, the next show will be on Wednesday, like usual. That's Wednesday, May 14th. We'll go live that night to talk about all the matches coming up for the final week of online Call of Duty and the final week of the Major 4 qualifiers. We'll also talk about anything that pops up in between then. I don't expect any roster changes going in, but who knows? Maybe some teams get real desperate going into this final week of online COD. Yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I don't think there's likely going to be any roster changes, but especially with the OpTic situation throughout this entire season, I have not had a very good read on when teams are and aren't going to make change. So me saying there aren't going to be changes might mean there will be something for us to talk about this week. So we'll have to wait and see. But end of the day, today's action, second to last week of online matches in the book. Only 10 more online matches to go in the Black Ops 6 season. Then we have Major 4, COD Champs, and Esports World Cup. And then the season's over. So this really flew by. I've had a blast, though. Appreciate all you guys showing love in the chat. Even, we had somebody spewing a little bit of hate that caught me off guard during the LAG Atlanta section where I was, kind of rambling there because I saw that and I was like, I was juggling my thoughts. So I apologize to anyone listening to that. If I didn't make sense or anything, but yeah, end of the day, appreciate all you guys showing love and whatnot in the chat. And we will be back later in a couple days for previewing those final online matches. So see you guys then. Thank you as always. And remember to send the chow.